The Atherton mansion was less a home and more a museum of a life that had once been lived. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a cavern of minimalist design where expensive modern art hung on stark white walls like silent, judgmental observers. In the center of the vast dining room, an immense mahogany table polished to a mirror shine was set for a single person. A sophisticated, untouched gourmet meal sat cooling on a porcelain plate, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the sepulchral silence that filled the space. This was Arthur Blackwood's kingdom, a fortress of wealth built to keep the world out, but which had, over the years, succeeded only in trapping him within its cold, opulent walls. He sat at the head of the table, a king on a lonely throne, his bespoke suit a perfect armor against a grief that money could never erase. His routine was the bedrock of his existence, a predictable sequence of events that shielded him from the chaos of memory. Lunch was served precisely at noon. He pressed a small, discreet button on the table's edge, the electronic chime echoing unnaturally in the stillness. He waited for Clara, his housekeeper, to appear with the water carafe. A minute passed, then two. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was broken. A flicker of annoyance, a crack in his carefully constructed composure, crossed his face. He called her name, his voice sounding foreign and loud in the empty hall. Still no answer. With a sigh of irritation, Arthur rose, his movements stiff and controlled. He walked through the echoing corridors, past art he no longer saw, and into the manicured perfection of his backyard, determined to restore order to his flawless, empty day. He found her at the far end of the property, tucked away behind a row of perfectly sculpted azalea bushes, as if trying to make herself invisible. The California sun cast a warm glow on the scene, a stark contrast to the coldness inside the mansion. Clara was sitting on the grass, her simple, worn uniform a smudge against the vibrant green of the lawn. But she was not alone. Seated beside her was a small, pale boy, his body frail and his hair thin. Arthur watched, unseen, as Clara unwrapped a simple sandwich from a piece of wax paper. With hands that moved with an ingrained tenderness, she broke it in half and gave the larger piece to the child, her own meal consisting of the remainder and a single apple. The quiet intimacy of the moment, the profound act of love in that shared, meager lunch, was a scene so foreign to his world that it felt like a blow. His sudden appearance startled them. Clara jumped to her feet, her face flushing with a mixture of shame and fear, instinctively trying to shield the boy from his view. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling. He didn't ask what she was doing. The question that came out was colder, sharper. "Who is this?" With tears streaming down her cheeks, she explained that it was her son Lucas, and she had brought him from the county hospital because it was the only time she had to share a meal with him. She was hiding, she confessed, so as not to be a bother, because she couldn't afford anything more than the sandwich they were sharing. Her quiet, desperate dignity in that moment of profound humiliation was a heartbreaking sight. It's in these moments of hidden struggle that you see a person's true strength, and it feels important to share these stories so they aren't forgotten. Subscribing to our channel is a small way to help us continue to give them a voice. The imposing dining room, which had always felt like a mausoleum, was suddenly and strangely alive. The silence was broken not by the echo of a solitary fork against porcelain, but by the hesitant scrape of a small chair and the quiet, nervous breathing of a mother and child. Arthur, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, felt clumsy and out of place in his own home. He served the boy a portion of the roasted chicken, his hands, usually so steady when signing multi-million-dollar contracts, fumbling with the silver serving utensils. As Lucas looked up at him, with wide, curious eyes, a ghost of a memory surfaced. They were Lily's eyes, the same shade of deep blue, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, the past and present collided, leaving Arthur breathless with a pain he thought he had buried long ago. Clara watched him, a storm of emotions swirling within her. The initial terror of being discovered had subsided, replaced by a disbelieving gratitude that felt fragile, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She saw past the formidable CEO to the man beneath, a man whose loneliness seemed to mirror her own, albeit in a world of unimaginable luxury. As Lucas ate with a quiet reverence, she found herself explaining the relentless cycle of their lives. She spoke of the county hospital, of the long, sterile corridors, the smell of antiseptic, and the endless hours spent waiting for test results. She described the aggressive leukemia that was waging a war inside her son's small body, a battle she felt she was fighting completely on her own, armed with little more than hope. Her words dismantled the fortress Arthur had so carefully constructed around his heart. Each detail she shared was a chisel against the stone, chipping away at the stoicism he wore like armor. He wasn't just in his dining room anymore. He was back in a different hospital years ago, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as a doctor delivered the news that shattered his world. He remembered the weight of his wife Eleanor's hand growing cold in his, and the unbearable silence in his daughter Lily's room after they turned off the machines. He had used his fortune to build a monument to his grief, a place so empty no new memories could form. But Clara's story, her quiet, dignified suffering, was forcing him to confront the ghosts he had run from for so long. Breaking the somber mood, Lucas pointed a small finger toward a large, abstract canvas on the wall, a chaotic swirl of reds and blacks. "What's that angry painting?" he asked, his voice clear and untroubled. Arthur was taken aback. Business partners and guests had always commented on the piece's monetary value, but no one had ever asked what it meant. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "My wife Eleanor, she loved it," he explained, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after years of disuse. "She said it wasn't angry. She said it was full of passion, like a star being born." In that simple exchange, a shared moment of genuine human connection, a window opened in the sealed tomb of his heart, letting in a sliver of unexpected light. What began as a single, awkward meal soon blossomed into an unspoken daily ritual. Every day at noon, the grand mahogany table was set for three. The sepulchral silence of the Atherton mansion was gradually replaced by the soft murmur of conversation and, on good days, the sound of Lucas's laughter. Arthur learned about Lucas's favorite superheroes, his unwavering belief in their power to save the world, and his secret dream to fly to Mars. Through the boy's eyes, Arthur began to see the world not as a series of transactions and market fluctuations, but as a place of wonder and possibility. He started to feel the thaw of a long internal winter, a slow and tentative return to life he never thought possible. This budding affection, however, was a double-edged sword. Arthur found himself lingering in the toy aisles of expensive stores, his hands hovering over model rockets and action figures he knew Lucas would love, the same ones he once bought for Lily. Each gift was an act of both profound joy and profound terror. He was becoming attached, weaving his life into the fragile tapestry of theirs, and the fear of it all being ripped away again was a constant, cold dread in the pit of his stomach. The voice of his past loss was a relentless whisper, warning him that to love was to invite devastation, urging him to retreat back into the sterile safety of his solitude before it was too late. The changes in Arthur did not go unnoticed. His brother Richard, a man whose ambition was as sharp and cold as cut glass, watched his brother's transformation with suspicion. During a tense meeting, he cornered Arthur, his voice laced with cynical concern. "This housekeeper," Richard began, Are you sure you know what you're doing? Men in your position, with your history, are targets. Grief can make a man reckless, Arthur. Don't let this woman and her sob story cloud your judgment. The accusation, though baseless, struck a nerve. It fed the very fears Arthur was battling, making him question if his genuine desire to help was merely a foolish, emotional impulse being exploited by a clever manipulator. Meanwhile, Clara was fighting her own relentless battles far from the pristine quiet of the mansion. Her life was a grueling marathon of administrative hurdles and emotional exhaustion. She spent hours on hold with the insurance company, her voice remaining steady as she argued for coverage of a crucial medication that had been denied. At the hospital, she navigated a labyrinth of paperwork and indifferent clerks, her dignity a thin shield against their weary impatience. In her cramped apartment building, she felt the weight of her neighbors' stares, their whispers a mixture of pity and judgment. It was a lonely, draining war against a system designed to wear down the human spirit, a fight she refused to lose. One day, Lucas was too weak to make the trip, his small body racked with fever. Arthur sat at the head of his vast, empty table, the silence pressing in on him with an almost physical force. The loneliness he had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a punishment. Unable to bear it, he had his chef prepare a simple chicken soup and drove to Clara's apartment, a part of the city he hadn't visited in decades. The sight of their small, cluttered living space, the worn-out sofa and the precarious stack of medical bills on the kitchen counter, made the reality of their struggle hit him with the force of a physical blow. It's so easy to be blind to the battles people fight right beside us. If you feel that these stories of quiet courage deserve to be heard, please consider subscribing. It helps us bring more of them to light. He found Lucas asleep in a small bed tucked into a corner of the living room. He sat beside him, the scent of antiseptic clinging to the air, and began to read from a book about space exploration he had brought. Clara stood in the doorway, watching this powerful, solitary man read to her son with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Later, after Lucas was sound asleep, she finally let her guard down. In a voice heavy with unshed tears, she spoke of her late husband, a firefighter who had died saving a family from a burning building. She confessed her deepest terror, the all-consuming fear of losing Lucas, the last piece of her heart, the only reason she kept fighting. Their fragile world was shattered during a routine follow-up appointment. The oncologist entered the small examination room, his face a mask of professional sympathy that did little to soften the blow. The standard chemotherapy regimen was no longer working. The leukemia was advancing, aggressive and relentless. He mentioned a new experimental gene therapy, a last-ditch effort that offered a glimmer of hope. But then came the caveat, delivered with clinical detachment. The treatment was not covered by any insurance plan, and the cost was staggering, a sum so immense it seemed unreal, $1.5 million. For Clara, the words were a death sentence, the final cruel extinguishing of the flame of hope she had guarded so fiercely. Arthur watched as the color drained from Clara's face, leaving behind a pallor of pure, unadulterated despair. He saw her shoulders slump, the fight leaving her body as the impossible weight of that number crushed her spirit. The doctor's voice faded into a dull drone, and Arthur was once again transported to that other hospital room, to the moment he was told that all the money in the world couldn't save his daughter. But this time, something was different. The paralyzing grief of the past was met with a surge of fierce, protective resolve. He looked at Clara's broken expression and knew he could not stand by and watch another family be destroyed. This was no longer just about Lucas. It was about defiance, about a refusal to be a passive victim of fate again. It was about saving himself. The hospital hallway was a sterile, white canyon carved out of grief. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken fear, was punctuated by the rhythmic, distant beeping of machines that measured life in electronic pulses. Clara sat on a hard plastic chair, a solitary figure lost in a sea of impersonal white walls. She was no longer crying. She had moved past tears into a state of hollowed-out shock, her body a fragile shell containing an unbearable emptiness. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a cruel loop of finality. Lucas was in the ICU, his small body fighting a war it was destined to lose without a miracle. When Arthur found her, she didn't even look up. She was a statue of despair, and the sight of her utter desolation was a reflection of a ghost he knew all too well. He stood there for a long moment, the polished marble floor reflecting his own rigid silhouette. Every instinct, honed by years of self-preservation, screamed at him to turn around, to retreat to the safety of his cold, empty mansion, where feelings could be managed and grief could be contained. He saw himself in that same hallway, years ago. After the doctors had told him there was nothing more they could do for Lily, the memory was a physical blow, a phantom pain that still had the power to steal his breath. But this time, the past did not paralyze him. It ignited something else entirely, a defiant rage against the cruel randomness of fate. He would not be a spectator to this tragedy. The journey of the human heart is a mysterious thing, often turning toward the light in the darkest of places. Sharing these moments of profound change feels vital, and if you agree, subscribing helps us continue to bring them forward. He walked over and knelt in front of her, ignoring the sterile floor against the fine wool of his trousers. He gently took her hands, which were as cold as ice. They were the hands of a fighter who had finally been defeated. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the fog of her despair. "This isn't about money. This isn't charity." He looked directly into her vacant eyes, forcing her to see him, to hear him. "You and Lucas, you brought me back to life. For years this house has been a tomb, a monument to what I lost. I lost my daughter Lily. She was 7, just like Lucas." The confession hung in the air between them, a raw, unvarnished piece of his soul that he had never offered to anyone before. He was no longer a benefactor. He was a fellow traveler in the land of loss. His grip on her hands tightened, not with force, but with an urgent plea for her to understand. Her smile, her questions about my angry paintings. He made me feel something I thought was dead forever. He gave me a reason to do more than just exist. Arthur's carefully constructed composure finally broke, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. "I couldn't save my family, Clara. I've lived with that failure every single day. But I will not stand by and watch another family be destroyed. He's not just your son anymore. From this moment on, we are in this together. We will fight for him, and we will win." It was a vow, a declaration made not from a place of wealth or power, but from the deepest, most broken part of his heart, now mended by this new, terrifying and beautiful purpose. Clara stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. She saw past the billionaire CEO to the grieving father who was offering her not just his fortune, but his shared humanity. The impossible weight on her shoulders, the crushing burden of that $1.5 million figure, began to lift, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope. The tears that finally came were not of sorrow, but of a profound, soul-shaking relief. She nodded slowly, a silent acceptance that transcended words. In that cold, impersonal hospital corridor, under the unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights, a new family was forged. They were no longer a man, a woman, and a child caught in a tragedy, but a united front, bound by love and loss, ready to wage war against the darkness. The fight for Lucas's life was a maelstrom of calculated action. Arthur, A man who had conquered boardrooms and hostile takeovers now waged a different kind of war. He moved with a speed and precision that left the hospital administration reeling. Phone calls were made, specialists were flown in, and the $1.5 million, a sum that had represented an insurmountable wall of despair for Clara, was transferred with the simple click of a button. He sat with her through the long nights of the treatment, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in the turbulent sea of beeping machines and hushed medical consultations. He learned the names of the nurses, the rhythm of the ICU, and the delicate art of distracting a sick child with stories of distant galaxies. As the experimental therapy began to work its slow, arduous magic, turning the tide within Lucas's small body, Arthur realized he wasn't just funding a cure. He was rebuilding his own reason to live, one fragile, hopeful day at a time. The Atherton mansion was reborn. The sepulchral silence was permanently shattered, replaced by the joyful chaos of a child's existence. The immense mahogany table, once a monument to loneliness, was now frequently covered in Lego creations and homework assignments. The angry painting on the wall was joined by Lucas's own vibrant, hopeful artwork, taped up with a reverence once reserved for masterpieces. The change was more than cosmetic. It was a fundamental shift in the soul of the home. Over time, the unspoken bond between them was given a name. With Clara's tearful blessing, Arthur formally adopted Lucas, the legal documents a mere formality for a truth their hearts had known for months. He was no longer Arthur Blackwood, the solitary tech magnate. He was a father. He and Clara, bound not by romance but by a shared love and a profound mutual respect, had become a family in the truest sense of the word. This personal transformation rippled outward, becoming a force for greater good. Haunted by the memory of Clara's quiet desperation, Arthur knew their story was not unique. He established the Hearth and Hope Foundation, an organization with a simple yet profound mission to provide comprehensive support for families battling pediatric cancer. The foundation didn't just cover astronomical medical bills, it provided housing near hospitals, delivered nutritious meals so no parent had to choose between a hospital vigil and a hot dinner, and offered the kind of logistical and emotional support that allowed families to focus solely on their child's healing. Arthur stepped back from his CEO role, pouring his energy and business acumen into the foundation. He had discovered that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the technology he built, but the hope he could help restore, ensuring no other family felt as alone as Clara once had. 5 years later, the California sun shone brightly on the dedication of a new pediatric wing at the very county hospital where Lucas had been treated. Arthur stood between Clara and a healthy, vibrant 12-year-old Lucas, his arm draped proudly around his son's shoulders. A polished bronze plaque near the entrance bore the name of their foundation, a permanent symbol of their journey from a hidden garden to this public celebration of life. As the crowd applauded, Arthur looked at Clara, whose eyes shone with a quiet, unshakable joy, and then at Lucas, who was already dreaming of the stars again. It was a reminder that from one moment of shared humanity, a legacy of healing can be built. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Subscribing ensures these powerful stories of transformation continue to be told. In that shared embrace, surrounded by the promise of countless futures saved, Arthur Blackwood finally understood the true measure of wealth.